I'd like to introduce today's main speaker. We're very privileged to have Megan Gilmour come and talk to us. Now, Megan Gilmour is the founder of an organisation called Missing Children. Is it Missing Children? Missing Schools?
Missing Schools.
Missing Schools. I can't remember. Missing Schools, which is focused on keeping sick kids connected to their schools. So hopefully Megan will tell us all about it. And she's speaking.
Thank you. So this is a great lyric for me to start on because it was a watershed for me during the journey that I'll share with you today. So it's great to be here with you today, and thank you so much for having me. I think it's fitting that we're here to explore the topic of connection at an assembly. I think that's so cool. And I love what we've heard just now because I felt like I left so much out of this, and I felt like everything I left out's been covered. I was actually going to ask you to turn to each other and share something about connection, but I don't need to because it's already been done. So, this is sort of my anatomy of connection. It's not complete, it's not necessarily researched, but it is from my lived experience. So my bio for the event tells you that I'm the chair of Missing School, an advocacy. I co-founded it, and it's an advocacy organisation to keep seriously sick kids connected to their schools. But that's not the only perspective that I bring. I'm a citizen, formerly an international aid and development worker with experience across 24 countries. I'm a social change champion, a lifelong learner, lately an entrepreneur, and a mum. And for as long as I could remember, I used to tell people I wanted to live an extraordinary life. And I got one. I just didn't realise that extraordinary can crack you wide open. So I'll be sharing with you some lessons that I've learned. And the first one that I learned after this experience is to connect to a purpose that's bigger than the pain. So in late 2009, our then 9-year-old son commenced a very slippery slope into critical illness. We don't know why it happened. He developed 2 rare blood disorders, and on top of that, he developed pre-leukemia. So it was a life and death situation. He's statistically speaking an N equals 1. He's a sample size of one boy in the whole world who they know of who had these 3 disorders at one time. And the first 2 caused his bone marrow to completely fail. And for those of you who might not know, our bone marrow creates our blood cells. So to stop us from bleeding, to protect us from infection, and to send oxygen around our body. So Darcy was blood transfusion dependent and at immediate risk of life-threatening infection and life-threatening bleeds. He stood at the brink of life and death. He lived in hospitals. He couldn't run, swim, play, or go to school. And with no immune system, he was kept in medically protective isolation for 6 months with very little contact with any but a few people. So for 2 years, the hospital became Darcy's home. Harsh treatments, painful procedures, and the trauma of watching other kids die around him became his learning experience and his environment. And when all else failed, treatment-wise, he was fast-tracked into a bone marrow transplant, which is a last-line treatment that, if it doesn't kill you, will cure you. So the lesson I learned here is to connect a hard and right solution to a hard problem. So 6 years ago today, Darcy received the stem cells from the cord of a baby girl, and her stem cells saved his life. So it turns out that that a complete stranger is a closer tissue match to Darcy than his full blood sister. Darcy has two DNAs. He shares the same blood DNA with his donor. And so they are inseparably connected. He's never met her. So he calls this phenomenon his inner girl. And I learnt through that to connect to a truth, and that is that we are all biologically related and connected. So at around the 18-month mark into his illness, it all started to get too hard. His medical condition as well as the treatments were compounding, and we could see that Darcy was really starting to lose hope and starting to opt out. And he became institutionalised in the hospital setting. He stopped longing for home, he stopped longing for his friends, and he stopped longing for school. So the life that he loved and had been fighting for just seemed to be drifting away. And the longer the illness went on, the greater the disconnection. And it wasn't because people were being mean, it was just that life was moving on and remoulding itself without him there. And he was losing his place, and he knew that. So I was asking myself as I watched this, are we saving a body or a life? The focus in that setting was clearly on saving the body. But what was that for if he couldn't build a life that was worth living in a way that he defined it, with his place, his sense of place, and to reach his potential in a community that he defined as his? So an example is that he called his teacher here in Canberra his teacher, even though he never sat in that person's class for the whole year. And he saw a hospital school teacher. So his view of his teacher, his community, was here, somewhere other than where he was. And so what I learned from that was that we connect to places, spaces and communities as a way of expressing our identity, and we choose them rather than the other way around. And so it wasn't for me about saving first and fixing later, which was often argued to me, because it mattered now to Darcy. He was experiencing the disconnection and isolation now, and he was living it. And he felt all the ways in which there was more to him than his illness, but that wasn't getting any expression. And so I needed to show him a way to survive. I needed to show him that he had a future and that he wasn't forgotten. And in the face of imperfect health, school is a gateway to that. And so I turned to the school and I started asking for help. I thought I should try harder. I thought I hadn't done enough. And I started to ask for more academic support and more connection to his peers and more interaction. And after many unmet promises, Darcy said to me, "Don't bother, Mum, they won't call." It was really painful and heartbreaking. So what I learnt there was that we need to connect to hope now if we're to believe in a desired future state. So the school said to me that they couldn't do any more. They didn't provide distance education. And actually I felt blocked at every turn. Fortunately, I could see that I wasn't being singled out for special attention in this. I saw it as a systemic problem, and I started to think about how many kids were actually in this situation, and I started to think about the lost opportunity not only for connection and education, but also to build cognitive resilience in the face of a high-risk situation as a means to offer them protection. And I knew that equity, access and inclusion were rights that flowed down from the UN, and I knew this was a state responsibility because that was my work background. And so I accepted the help of another mum whose son had come through a similar issue, and we had some small wins for Darcy, but frankly it was a real struggle. So after a few months in late 2011, Darcy started to get better. And we don't really know why. It was as kind of shocking in a way as him becoming ill. So in February 2012, after we returned to Canberra from Sydney, missing school started in a lounge room in Scullin. And it started the way all good revolutions start, with a connection, a beverage, and a healthy helping of constructive dissatisfaction. So what I learnt was I could connect my work experience and my life experience to a worthy endeavour, and that's what I did. So why this? Because many seriously sick kids are sitting at home or in hospital watching from the sidelines and missing school. Some will miss days and weeks, and others will miss months and even years. Sometimes it's in long blocks, sometimes it's in recurring blocks throughout the whole school life, and it adds up to a lot of missed time. And their siblings, like Darcy's sister Mia, also experience disconnection, because many of these children, for example, children in the ACT, need to travel interstate for treatment, so they also leave their homes. And missing school's not just a physical thing, it's about mental and emotional connection too. Because kids who miss school miss everyday learning opportunities, social connections that help them feel better now and build positive futures. Like having rude talk with your friends while your parents aren't around and your teachers aren't listening. But the evidence absolutely shows that the double burden of illness and school absence can hinder academic development, disrupt school relationships, and diminish motivation and engagement. And isolation from the school community and peers can have profound long-term effects on emotional and social well-being, and of course productive capacity into adulthood. So rather than read the list of side effects from the research, which is long and confronting, it's probably better to turn to what the kids themselves say. And we asked 100 of them, and I'll show you a few responses in just a short while. And they so match the experience that our son went through. I cried when I read every one of them. My learning from this part of the journey was that connecting sick kids to learning and their peers is actually a protection from harm. So here we see 15 years old, away because of illness for 1 month and 2 weeks. Makes me feel sad. Think of friends and falling behind in work and school activities. 14 years old, anorexia, away for 5 weeks. Kind of sad. When I think of school, I think of friends and schoolwork and sport. 8 years old, away because of illness for 24 weeks. Makes me feel sad because when I think of school, I think of my friends and teachers and games. 15 years old, an accident and brain injury, 4 months and 1 week. I feel upset because when I think of school, I think of my friends and having a routine. I miss my news day and sports day and computer day. 7, with cystic fibrosis, this time away for 3 weeks, makes me feel sad because I think of everything and all the things I'm missing, and I wish I was there. 9 years old, illness, 4 weeks, feeling sad, thinking of friends, technology and fun. 6 years old and sick, 8 months, makes me feel happy and sad because I think of my friends and PE. 7, with leukemia, 12 months and 38 weeks, feel a bit sad, and I think of my friends and my teachers and my buddies. So when we rolled these together into a word cloud, this is what they said they think about when they miss school. So it's not hard to see what's important. And this is how they told us they feel. My favourite on that is poop. I think it sums it up nicely. So why missing school? We're the first organisation in Australia to do this work of keeping seriously sick kids connected to their schools, and we're parent-led, and we lead from the lived experience, evidence from the lived experience, and we back that up with research to do our advocacy. And we're about getting the special learning and social needs of these kids met through everyday practices in their schools. So we look at the problem from a systems perspective, because we realise that families and kids can't do this on their own, and neither can teachers or health practitioners. We actually need a sustainable response from our systems to this to help even the people working in them. Because we want this connection to happen everywhere, every day, so that kids aren't abandoned to the goodwill of a few people or some optional extras or even charities. So we're not about building a charitable program to fix this or a parallel system. We actually want to see it in our everyday systems. And we want to shift the mindsets from this soft discrimination of low expectations that is often associated with kids in this circumstance. Because if they can survive, we want them to be able to thrive. And my lesson here is that we need to connect failures in our systems to sustainable, embedded change. So why now? Many people say, well, they're sick, shouldn't they just be able to rest? Well, we think that there's no time that matters more to them. And quite often they're spending a lot of their days playing video games because there's nothing else to do. The evidence tells us that maintaining school connection in this circumstance does mitigate risk and harm, and I'll argue that it helps health outcomes as well. So school connection from our point of view offers a sense of normality, and it keeps kids up to date academically and socially, so that when they're moving out, in and out of their school between treatment, they can make that transition a lot more easily as well, and so they don't feel alienated every time they're coming back in. And the fact is that medical science is actually saving the lives of kids who once would have died. That's a fact. And giving a better quality of life to kids who have life-limiting illnesses. And we have technology now that is enabling us to connect, but our education systems haven't caught up yet. And so actually it's this disconnection through absence that creates a lot of the problems that these kids experience when they're back in school. So often they're even absent when they're sitting in the classroom because they've been so disconnected. So my lesson here is that we need to connect new thinking and technologies to old intractable problems. So what have we done? Well, almost 5 years on, we've achieved quite a lot with very little. I think, maybe last year we got a donation of about $3,000 maximum, and that's what we've operated on. So the main thing that we've done is we've raised this into consciousness in many areas, and we're putting it onto a national agenda. In October last year, we launched Australian First Research at Parliament House, and we commissioned the Australian Research Alliance for Children and Youth because we didn't want to be big tobacco and write our own research. So we actually ended up co-writing it with them because they hadn't heard of the issue either. And that research looked at who are they, how do we know what works, and whose job is it? And what we found is that an estimated 60,000 kids find themselves in this circumstance across Australia. But we don't know the actual number because nobody's counting. We also found that. And we found that while there are some good models out there, there are actually no evidence-based models in practice across Australia to support them. Not surprisingly, we found that our Commonwealth legislation in education and the state and territory legislation provides for inclusive connection and support and access. The fact is, it's not happening in practice. So in addition, the launch achieved a statement of support from the Prime Minister, and the National Children's Commissioner. And I won't tell you the connection story on that piece, but it's quite a good story for another time. We got a front page Canberra Times story and a nationally trending media story across all media platforms. And so we have no way of knowing how many people that reached who didn't know about the issue. And we also made face-to-face and written petitions to ministers of health and education, premiers and other politicians, including and the Prime Minister's office. Our advocacy after that resulted in a 100,000 follow-on research project funded by the Commonwealth Government. So this is the first time that they will be responding to the issue. And we've also more recently galvanised support from the ACT Education Directorate. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a minute. And had early conversations with the Secretary of the Education Council, which sits under COAG and is the meeting point for all education ministers. Another great connection story around that one. We were shortlisted on an application to Google Impact Challenge. Our tiny not-for-profit got through to interview stage on that, and we didn't get to the finals, but we did get a great outcome. Again, I'll come back to that. And 2 weeks ago, I was awarded a Churchill Fellowship to study education system models for connection for these kids in the Netherlands, the UK, Canada, Finland, Sweden, and Belgium. And that will happen next year, and that's to bring back lessons from overseas systems and insinuate them into our systems. So I'm looking forward to that. So what I learnt from this part of the work is about connecting criticisms to capacity. So all the things for which I've been criticised, my character, over my life are exactly the things that have helped me do this. Outspoken, willful, thinks too much, too sensitive, and my favourite, rebellious. So this for me has been about connecting to the discomfort that comes with change. And it's just, I'm just used to it now. I'm a pain in the backside, and I know how that feels, and that's okay. So what will we do? I mentioned the concept of sick kids being absent even when they're present. So what about if they could be present when they're absent? And we kept getting asked when we'd speak to these education departments, so what's the solution? Which I found fascinating, since we were 3 mums and they had a whole education department to draw on. But rookie error for not going forward with a solution, we decided more recently, we'll give you one. And we are now promoting the use of telepresence robots. So, for those who don't know, the robot units are about so high, and they allow two-way real-time connection for these kids into their classroom. And they can remote control the robot from their hospital room or their home via a laptop. And so theoretically they can go to lunch with their friends. They can be seen on the screen and talk through the screen. I guess they could even be naughty if they wanted, which is cool. And the teacher can communicate with them as well. So rather than, you know, having this sort of somebody else as a go-between, they can actually be there. They're a really cost-effective solution at about $5,000 if you compare that to a teacher's aide, maybe 50 with on costs a year on year. This is very achievable, and this is exactly the solution that we put forward in the Google Impact Challenge. And we got the Education Directorate here in the ACT to agree to be a pilot jurisdiction for testing them. Because what I would love to do is do that and then create a fear of missing out on all the innovation for all the other states and territories. So we didn't get through and get our $750,000, but I'm still going after the money to make this happen here in the ACT. We'll be the first in Australia to do it as a jurisdiction, and only third, I think, in the world. So, and my theory of change is that once you put the robots in, the system will have to deal with all of the change and reform that it needs to take care of. I prefer that than waiting for 20 years for the system to change, which is what I think will happen and how it's feeling to me. So just think, more than 60,000 sick kids could connect to their 3.78 million peers, 300,000 teachers, 9,000 schools across Australia. Technology is not the only solution, but it is a game changer in this one. So this lesson for me was connect to creative opportunities when you hit a critical constraint. It's worked for me every time. Every time I hit a barrier, that's where I start to think hard and look for different solutions, and invariably I find them. So what then? Well, here's my dirty little secret. There's not a single day that I don't want to give up. That's not a great thing to hear from someone who's trying to do a big mission, but that's the truth for me. And why is that? Because it's hard, it's slow, and it's frustrating. And frankly, because it keeps putting pressure on my wound. But then I remember that my too hard is actually a luxury of choice. And I connect back to what I witnessed and what I saw those kids doing, and I think it's actually not too hard, and I keep going. And I also connect to my unshakable belief that this kind of connection will make a positive difference for these kids, socially, emotionally, and academically, and to help them to actually build a life that's worth living and to be able to reach their potential like their peers, or at least have the chance to do that. So if we're going to save bodies, we have to be able to save hearts and minds too. And what I learnt from this is that connecting is a daily practice in humanity, not a sometimes goal. So our imagined future is this radical notion of continuous school connection for seriously sick kids is something that'll someday just be taken for granted, and that's when all kids will receive full support from their schools as a matter of course. And when we cure missing school, our organisation Missing School will close its doors because the matter will be in full view and we'll be able to turn off the lights. So my biggest lesson is, let's keep connecting our spotlight to the darkest of places, because we absolutely can enlighten failing systems. Thank you so much for listening and for assembling.